Last time on Big Questions, we asked whether suffering shows there's no God kind enough or strong enough to stop it. We spoke to a non-believer.
How do you explain all the misery and pain in this world if there's a God who is active in it?
And a believer.
If you're going to have a universe in which love is possible, hate must be possible. In other words, decision must be possible. A certain freedom of will.
We heard the idea that a lot of suffering is caused by human choices, ours and other people's.
The foundation of evil in a world created by a good God has come from the abuse of free will.
But what about the suffering caused by nature? The suffering many call an act of God.
The problem with this free will explanation is that it doesn't explain a lot of suffering in the world. It doesn't explain why you have a hurricane that kills thousands of people, or a tsunami that kills 300,000 people.
Does this show there couldn't be a kind creator?
We call it natural evil, but I would really say it's unnatural. It wasn't supposed to be there.
Some say we're accidents in a universe born by chance. Some say we're children of God. I'm Grenville Kent, a Christian academic, and the new atheists have got me questioning my faith. So I'm going wherever the questions take me with my ever-curious son, Marcus, and talking to leading thinkers on both sides of the God question. Because I really want the evidence. Is there a God? And will I ever find a hat that fits?
Bullshit.
Kevin Inglis, 9 years old, is having an epileptic seizure. He has over 100 per year. He also has autism. And if that were not enough, a profound intellectual disability. Kevin's mother Louise was a great friend from uni, a bright, sporty, positive person. Having a child with a severe disability would be my worst nightmare. So I wonder how her life is now.
An ordinary day for Kevin starts with about 11 anti-epileptic drugs that he has to have. He has a morning routine, just getting him breakfasted and toilet and dressed and ready for school. Each day is pretty much the same. Kevin functions far more happily when he's got a stable routine. Kevin has a lot of challenges that most children his age would know nothing about. He's nearly 10, but he's never spoken a single word in his life. And he doesn't have the cognitive ability to use sign language or to write. So communication is a massive challenge. He attends a special needs school for children with quite severe disabilities. It's working on just basic life skills, routine, toileting, very basic kind of education. Anything that he learns takes a long time, takes lots of tiny steps, repetition just over and over and over to learn the smallest skill.
I wonder what life is like for Kevin. Does he suffer through every day? Or does he feel happiness that outweighs his suffering?
He does have times where he's not happy, of course, sometimes when he's frustrated, and I think he doesn't know what he wants, and so it's hard for us to know what he wants. And sometimes I see anger in his eyes and a very intense frustration, and it can be difficult when he has clusters of seizures and he's sick. But overall, I think mostly he's got a good quality of life.
Louise is relentlessly optimistic and works unbelievably hard to give Kevin as much quality of life as humanly possible. She deserves a parenting medal. But does he appreciate it? How much is he there? What's it like being Kevin? It hits me just how busy Louise is doing and managing for Kevin. It's like a full-time job for a highly qualified person. And with what return? With what progress? Kevin's older brother, Matthew, is blitzing school and music and is coached in cricket by one of New Zealand's finest.
Sometimes it feels like we've got two only children because they're each so different, and I think it's frustrating for Matthew at times too because I'm not as available as I'd like to be to do things with him. During the first few years, Matthew tried quite consistently to play with Kevin, but there was never any reciprocation. And as the years have gone by, there's less and less kind of effort from Matthew's behalf because there's just no return. I think it's a disappointment for Matthew.
Watching Louise invest so much in her son, I'm pretty sure she never expected motherhood to look like this. Why does my friend suffer with disability when I have a healthy family? There's no obvious cause, no apparent logic in how suffering and evil can hit us.
To go into that specialist appointment and be told that Kevin had severe autism, I was absolutely devastated. I was shattered. I was scared. I didn't know anything about autism. I felt completely out of my depth. And I went home and cried so much I could hardly open my eyes. It was a very difficult thing to accept, and I didn't accept it straight away. It took about 6 months probably. And during that time, I sought opinions from 2 other specialist paediatricians. And it wasn't until the third one said to me emphatically that Kevin had autism that I conceded they must be right. There's also something about just not wanting to accept it. That's just not in my life plan. And I remember taking Kevin to the car, struggling to get him in his car seat, fumbling with the buckle, just trying to do what I had to do. Driving to my friend's place, and she just opened the doors and I just burst into tears on her shoulders, and it was really difficult. I still remember it like it was yesterday.
So how do you bounce back from that? Louise's life seems an ongoing emergency, enough to wipe out your career and pressure your marriage, your parenting, your friendships.
So Louise, you have good external support networks, but how do you cope in here?
I've got really good friends and family, and they're always there for me. I really try and practice good physical and psychological habits. I feel so much better after regular exercise, and I always try and eat well and sleep well, and it's just basic stuff that really helps. I try and guard what I think. I try and focus my mind on what we can do and what's helping and what's good, and make myself just rattle off a list of 10 things I'm thankful for, and it changes my perspective. And I have a strong God connection. I really like to just pray, sometimes alone, sometimes in a group. I like to really meditate on a passage of scripture and just mull it over and feed on it. And I belong to a church that's very supportive and has really looked for ways that they can help Kevin and I.
So I went to church with Kevin and one of his carers, while Louise was meeting with her friends. Everyone seemed to adapt to his special needs. But even in a great environment, distress could come out of the blue. With the best care, he's still confused and sad, and your heart just breaks for him. I'm emotionally wrung out after watching for a few days, but this is Louise's whole life.
Just recently, it's been a difficult time too, approaching his 10th birthday. Sometimes I can naively think that I've got used to Kevin's issues and I'm on top of it all and it's okay. But I do find that significant milestones bring the grief to the surface again. And so that's been a challenge too.
What kind of grief do they bring?
A grief or a loss of dreams. think every parent imagines things for their child. Things that they will be able to do, friends that they'll have. I wanted so much more for him.
Happy 10th birthday. No, not Kevin.
Kevin has reached 10 and we've all survived, and I think that is worth celebration. But thank you. It's a journey that I could never have imagined, and it's a journey that I wouldn't have chosen. But I want to thank you for choosing to stand by us.
Watching a decade of care and tears and love and disappointment, I was struck by the everyday tragedy of this little guy's life. One day he'll be big and strong with aging parents. And what then? Yet Louise shows unstoppable care and determination to make the best possible life. Philosophers would say Kevin's suffering is natural evil, the evil that comes from nature. We see it on the news every day, nature's power or defects causing people and animals to suffer. If God is the creator, then is he to blame?
My view now as a non-Christian is simply that the world is a capricious place. Nature is dangerous, and we often get in the way of it. And so I don't think you need a supernatural explanation of the devil and his demons to explain why there are earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricanes.
But we call it natural evil, but I would really say it's unnatural. It wasn't supposed to be there. Our physical world has been impacted by sin. And so nature itself has been disrupted. And so the world itself is not the way it was supposed to be.
When a child starves to death, which happens about every 12 seconds in our world, there's nothing good that comes out of that. And we shouldn't pretend that there is, I think. I think it's an insult to the person who suffers to pretend, well, something good's come of that.
I read this powerful article about an author who wrote, she taught English to kids who were dying of cancer in a hospital. And, it tears your guts out. And she says, every one of these kids that I'm studying with, every one of them is going to die. And then she said she was talking to the doctors. And she used a phrase, and she said something like, well, I'm going to go back to this nonsense. Nonsense. Oh, we're going to make sense? Oh, there's a very good reason why 6-year-old Billy developed leukemia or developed some kind of cancer, suffered for 3 years, lost one limb and then another limb, and had all this chemo and on. And then when it's all over and done, when he's 9, he dies. But there's a very good logical reason for that. I find it easier to think there's no good reason for it. You know, it's irrational, it's illogical, it's nonsense, rather than, oh, well, we get to heaven, oh, now we know.
When it comes to natural evil, it gets more difficult, actually. I arrived in New Zealand just 2 or 3 days after the earthquake. And I discovered that was the only thing, not surprisingly, that people wanted to talk about. Earthquakes, why? And that forces you into a very curious situation. And I was meeting people who'd lost loved ones. It was right there in my face. And Christchurch Cathedral, I went there. I was taken by one of the emergency teams in to see it. And looking at it, you could see 2 things. You could see hideous damage to a building, but you could see traces of a former beauty. The universe is full of beauty and barbed wire. And that's the problem. My question is, that I ask myself so many times, is there anywhere evidence that there is a God that you could trust with that?
You're familiar with this concept of anthropic coincidences. This incredibly fine-tuned whereas, you know, the number of protons to neutrons or something are off by these fantastically small numbers. Life as we know it couldn't exist. And if you were to tweak one of them, you know, there'd be no life. So it'd be pretty devastating. Well, if that's God's physical laws, allow for almost no deviation without utter catastrophe, there'd be no human life. If God's physical laws are like that, what about God's moral law? If you look at the devastation that would come from not following the physical law, what happens when the moral law is violated?
In this marathon of suffering that she lives every day with her son, Louise believes in God. I asked her the age-old question, if God is good and powerful, why is Kevin's life like this, and Louise's life, and their families?
I'm not worried at all by the philosophical arguments against God's existence. Day to day, when I'm trying to support Kevin through his struggles and through his seizures, I have found God to be real. And I have found his spirit to comfort me and his word to assure me of a better future. If I don't believe in God, if this was just all there was to life, if Kevin was just going to suffer and live in this stressful existence in such a limited way, I just couldn't believe that. I mean, it's insulting, it's distressing to think that that's all that he could have. And I'm just assured that there is so much more for him.
If there is a God, it may be, just may be, that there's hope somewhere. But if there's no God, and if death is the end, there is no hope.
Life doesn't last long, and so you should enjoy it for all you can. We don't know why things go wrong in this world. We can't understand it all. There are mysteries that we'll never plumb, but we do have life, and we have one another. We have relationships. We have spouses, or we have children, or we have friends, or we have meaningful work, and we should throw ourselves into our lives because this life is all there's going to be.
I'm sympathetic with my atheist friends who say, well, there isn't a God. There isn't a God, that's it. And I've spoken to many of them. And I say, look, I understand you, but where has it got you? Because if there isn't a God, you've zero hope. Now, that may be the way the universe is. In fact, I once put it to Richard Dawkins, I says, your view of the universe is utterly bleak. He says, yes, but that doesn't mean it's false. I said, exactly, Richard, but it doesn't mean it's true either.
I don't believe for a moment that God's original world was created with genetic problems or any problems. In heaven, everything will be as it's meant to be. There will be no pain, there'll be no suffering, there'll be no sickness. We will see Kevin in full health, able to converse with us, able to look Jesus in the face, talk with him, able to develop friendships and climb trees and kick balls and do all the things that he hasn't been able to do here on earth. And that is such a strong hope for me, such a sure hope that it really strengthens me here in the present.
All the pain and suffering here on earth, it's ultimately good's gonna come out of it. Well, you say, well, that's sweet and that's nice, but that doesn't answer anything for me because we're the poor schnooks down here, groveling with pain, suffering, sickness, disease, and death. God's up in heaven. You know, the angel's feeding him grapes. He's up in heaven. He's fine. And, you know, he's going to work out all his stuff down here. He's got this grand conclusion that's going to come out, and everything is all going to be worked out. And that's fine. But you still, okay, he's up in heaven. We're down here.
The central Christian claim is that Jesus is God incarnate. Well, if that is true, what is God doing on a cross? And my response is to say, well, it certainly shows at the very least that God has not remained distant from the problem of suffering, but has himself become part of it.
God had no choice. If he wanted beings to love him, he had to create them free. He didn't have to create us, but he did it anyway, knowing the evil that would come. But because he's a good God, he's going to bring good out of it. We say, oh, that's great. He's going to bring good out of it, even though all the suffering and on and on and on. Oh, he's up in heaven. But no, The ultimate good that's going to come out of it is because he himself came down and suffered in ways that none of us could ever suffer, and suffered worse than any of us, what we know only individually. He bore our griefs and carried our sorrows. In some way there at the cross, Christ suffered in ways that none of us ever will.
And I notice the stories in the Gospels when Christ was faced with a family devastated by the death of the breadwinner, the two sisters. One was prepared to argue about the resurrection and discuss it, and Jesus did so. The other was just weeping, and he wept with her. Now, that really is God. It shows that there's a resonance. God has not remained distant. He's become part of this whole thing. Now, the next step, of course, is the most important. Jesus died. Well, millions of people have died, but he rose again. And it's that that makes all the difference for me. Because if there is resurrection, it means that death is not the end. Atheism is a hopeless religion. But I, who am a Christian, I do have a problem. I do have great questions, and I'll probably die with many of them unanswered, but at least I can see a possibility here that Christ died and rose again. He's going to judge the world. He's going to put right the problem of moral evil. But he's also going to deal with the question of natural evil. There's going to be a new heavens and a new earth.
Of course, there's no proof of that. You could see it as a fantasy. But is there evidence in the fact that Louise finds it helps in everyday life? Her faith seems to lift her. Many questions remain, like, how did evil arise? Is God to blame for that?
One of the things that I appreciated about the apocalyptic view when I was a Christian, that I continue to appreciate today, is that it takes evil very seriously. Evil isn't simply your free will that you do something bad to someone else, and evil isn't just nasty things that happen occasionally. Evil is, for an apocalypticist, is a real power in the world that is controlling things and that is affecting things and that is causing massive suffering.
The biblical claim reaches as far as saying that there is a personal malevolent being called the devil, or Satan, which simply means the accuser, who is involved, at some level at least, in originating the evil in this universe.
One of the clear teachings of some parts of the Bible is that God has a personal enemy, a Satan figure, a devil figure, who is a personal being that is opposed to God and his people. Just as God has his good angels, the devil has his demons. Just as God has the power of life, the devil has the power of death. Just as God can bring good, the devil can bring evil. This world, according to this apocalyptic worldview, is controlled by the forces of evil. And things are getting worse and worse. And they're going to get worse until the end, when literally all hell breaks out. When things get absolutely as bad as they can, then God will intervene. He will destroy the forces of evil. He will destroy the devil and the demons, and he'll set up a good kingdom where there's no more pain, misery, or suffering. And this end is going to come very soon. And God will make right what is wrong. This was the teaching of Jesus. This apocalyptic expectation itself is almost certainly wrong.
How many millions of cell phone calls are in this room right now? How many they're just as real as my voice. How many TV shows are in here, this room right now? Reruns of Gilligan's Island could be in this room right now. It's as real as, it's as real. But the way we're wired, the limited receptors we got, we completely miss it. You know, and so I said, why not then the existence of could there not be just a whole other realm of existence?
The clash between good and evil is behind so much great art, and stories from ancient legends to the latest film or comic book. And it's the meta-narrative of most religions. We're here to see Guido Reni's classic painting of the Christian view. Here, Michael, leader of God's angels, finally defeats Satan. Satan's muscular, showing evil is strong, but he's also chained, so evil is somehow limited by God. Michael has serious muscle and power, destroying evil without much effort, so the suffering of God on a cross is long ago. Good is triumphant now. Michael is in gold light, while the devil has hellfire and shadow. So is darkness a thing itself, or just the absence of light? Is evil a thing, or just the absence of love and logic? In the Christian view, evil is not a permanent thing and can be destroyed. So Jesus' teaching imagines a future world without evil.
What if there really is a God and a dark side to the supernatural beyond normal human perception? That could give a big enough explanation for Auschwitz, for child abuse, for the destruction of nature, even the struggles we feel in ourselves. And if evil really is destroyed and good rewarded at the end of the story, wouldn't that make our personal choices crucial? Of course, this leaves more questions. Why this suffering? Why me? Or how do I get on the good side if I've done evil? But the atheist view says we suffer in a universe of blind, pitiless indifference, and then we die, and that's it. Doesn't a belief in God have more to offer? What do you think?